You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
There we go, and we're live! Hello guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight on episode 60, we are going to go around the league discussing the latest Overwatch League news. We will share our preseason rankings for the 8 expansion teams, update you on Contenders Korea, and preview the 2019 season of the Overwatch League after the recent episode of Watchpoint. But before we can do that and get into the news and introduce you to my co-hosts, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us tonight for our live show on Twitch, and we can't forget to thank all of our repeat listeners. As you can tell, we are one soulmate down, but we have the return of another co-host, a man who has been between a Bob and a hard place, that being Spider. Spider, you know, Slambo's not here, but I still have to ask, what's up, nerd?
Well, our audio listeners won't see this, but the people watching us on Twitch will see that I got beat up by a 3-year-old. It looked much worse yesterday, but yeah, it's been a fun weekend. Christmas is in full swing. You know, we're doing all the fun Christmas activities, so not a whole lot of time to actually sit down and play. And we did sit down and play Friday night. Friday nights are usually the nights that I get to stream, so played a lot of Ashe. Actually, almost made it to 25. I'm only a couple levels short, so I'm looking to, you know, complete that run, get that done, and, you know, get placements done before the end of the season. But we'll see. I mean, it's a busy month, so who knows how it'll end up. Other than that, just, you know, enjoying some of the Contenders action. You know, really, we don't get to talk about it much on this show, but I'm really enjoying Contenders NA because there's actually a lot of really good players out there that, you know, I haven't paid attention to Contenders this much, you know, previously. You know, season 1 and 2, I would watch the playoffs, and that was it. So it's actually cool to actually sit down and actually watch, you know, the actual matches and see how teams are evolving and stuff like that. And more so in Contenders Korea, which we will talk about. There are 3 very dominant teams in Contenders Korea, and I'm interested to see how it ends up shaking up. So what about you, man? How's your weekend, you know, week? You've had a pretty busy week with all these interviews that you keep sending me to post on our YouTube.
I mean, I gotta keep you busy somehow. So yeah, obviously, like, Recall's been doing, well, we've expanded, just talking to, you know, not only Overwatch podcasters, but Overwatch content creators. So we're doing 3 releases a week. We already have, like, I think 4 or 5 out at this point. We got, like, another 3 or 4 to come. That's already recorded, good to go for upcoming releases, and that's been keeping me pretty busy. Outside of that, I also had a stomach bug over the weekend. That was fun. So I missed a day of work. Yeah, it's been a thing. It has affected all of us at this point. And, you know, like, my first day back at work, as I mentioned pre-show, like, this is the first thing that happens to me in the morning. I go in, I go to clean my glasses first thing in the morning, notice that the right side of my frames are, you know, a little bit out of place. I go to adjust it, and then they just snap. So I had to, you know, put some Gorilla Tape on it. So yeah, that's a thing. So not a good start overall in regards to my weekend, but it's Monday. It's a new week. We got, you know, some new rosters. We got a couple of sign-ins, you know, and we had a lot of notes to take in regards to Watchpoint because, yeah, there was a couple of flubs on Watchpoint that I'll definitely be bringing up here when we talk about this upcoming season. But let's jump into the news from this past week. So first up, you know, let's talk a little bit about Boston. You know, this is, like, really the only teams that has been taken maybe like putting some eyes on the South American region of contenders, because, we did see them pick up Klaus for Uprising Academy, so he's competed in Contenders North America, and now the Uprising have actually turned to South America again to sign their most recent pickup, which is Alamau, who also just so happens to come from the same team, Brazil Gaming House, or Base Tryhards, which are now known as. So Uprising have looked to add some more depth to their support line. So Alamau is the first South American Contenders player to join the Overwatch League, and the sign-in actually brings Boston up to 9 players on their roster. And what's interesting about that is that out of those 9 rostered players, 5 of them that were acquired during this current offseason for the Uprising came out of Contenders. So when we talk about this player, his signature heroes are Lucio and Zenyatta, which might seem a little bit weird. Normally, you have main support, you have flex support, and the reason this happened is because there was at one point where Calera was still on Brazil Gaming House, and he was the flex support. Or he was the main support for that team. So at that time, Alamau had basically been playing Zenyatta, and, Calero left, and then he went over to main support, and then he's been kind of on that role ever since. But in regards to his standout heroes, they are Zenyatta and Lucio, and with Brazil Gaming House, this is something we've talked about. Like, this has been the team that has been running South America. They are back-to-back South American Contenders champions, and if this season has been any indication, or the first 3 weeks are any indicator of how the playoffs are going to go, it's going to be another championship for this team. They are going to three-peat, and they really show no signs of slowing down, regardless of whatever sign-ins are happening during this season of Contenders. But, it seems like Boston, I don't want to say, like, this is a way for them to, kind of, like, buy low, sell high, but, like, I at least appreciate that they are, taking, some representatives out of, regions that don't really get opportunities. So I'm at least happy for that. And, coming from South America, they don't have the highest, like, payouts of Contenders. So this is going to be a significant boost in regards to financials for these players.
I will absolutely say it. They are trying to get the cheapest players possible to turn them into championship players, like they tried to do in Season 1. And they actually had a pretty good run at it. So there's no reason to think otherwise. Like that's basically the Kraft Group's MO for Overwatch right now. But I am with you. I am glad that this team, particularly from the South American region, is getting recognized, because they have been such a dominant force in the Contenders South America. Brazil Gaming House, it's basically all we've ever talked about for that region. When that region comes up, that's who we talk about. So I am glad to see that he is playing, and I do like the Lucio Zenyatta flex, because that, like you said, that is an uncommon combination. So that will lead to a little more versatility. And honestly, I think Kelix has something to be worried about right now, because if he hits it off with Aim God, you could see him playing with Aim God over Kelix, because Kelix had his moments, but he wasn't that, he wasn't the standout support from, Season 1 for Boston. He was just kind of like, okay, he's acceptable. He doesn't die, but other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of, conversation around him. So it's very possible that we could see these two together and Kelix sitting on the bench, which will bring even more focus to South America, which I'm happy for. Like anytime the regions that we don't normally get to see have players coming in, like it's almost the same conversation for Color Hex. Like when Color Hex came in, I was very excited to see him get signed out of Australia, just because it's not a region we see a lot of players come from.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this one is there really haven't been a lot of instances where, a player in the league has could serve as like a backup for multiple roles. Like,
right.
I think the only exception to that might be Kareev, because he has played so many different roles for the Valiant. But this is something that's really like astray from the norm. So, not only could he serve, as a Lucio player, but, if Aim God needs a little bit of rest, or, he's homesick, whatever, or if he just isn't feeling it, he could also flex to the flex support role to pick up that Zenyatta. So I'm curious to see whether or not that is going to play any part in this upcoming season, or if he's going to primarily stick to main support. But it's always nice to have the additional option, just in case something comes up, because you never know if something is going to happen, if someone's going to get injured, if someone's going to get sick, get kidney stones. It could be a multitude of different things over the course of a season, regardless of a condensed schedule, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, it's. I think every team should have at least one sub per role, whether or not they fit into flex, main, whatever. I think it's good to have one sub per role, or somebody on your team that can cross roles. I think that's going to become more and more important, because it seems like a lot of these teams are going for the condensed roster, like the 9-man, that type of roster. Like some teams are even go with 8-man, which I feel like is a mistake, because then you're really kind of hedging your bets against players getting sick. So, like I said, I like the uncommon combination, and I'm gonna bring him up already, but I feel like somebody like Sinatra can do that too. Like he's shown that he can play tank if he needs to in a GOATS meta. So I feel like players that can flex all around, regardless of, if they can perform that as their main role, I think will become more and more sought after. Like, Mickey was kind of famous in season 1 for going from Diva to Brigitte when we didn't know anything about Brigitte. And I think players that can do that will be more and more popular. So basically him showing that he can move from main to flex is just the first step to him moving from main to flex to main tank. Like, there you go. I said it first.
Yeah, and just briefly touching on something you said about Sinatra too. You talk about the shock, and their Reinhardt play left a lot to be desired. So, with Striker coming in, and having such a similar flex role on that team, like, who knows? Maybe we will see Sinatra kind of shift gears and play main tank. That is a possibility. But again, like, who knows? It might all be dictated on the meta, but like I wasn't overly impressed by the Reinhardt play kind of across the board with Super. And, who knows if things have changed at that point, but we do have some shock news, and that is that they have added, a couple new faces to their coaching staff, and this kind of comes straight with their partnership with UC Berkeley. So we have Aligned and Mercy joining the Shock as analysts due to this partnership. And Aligned will be focusing on gameplay. He'll serve as the data analyst for the team. Mercy will handle, more of that too. But, it seems like Aligned will be more so like on actually what's happening in the game. Mercy will be more like behind the scenes with the data analysis itself. And Aligned is really like no stranger to not only contenders, but UC Berkeley. So Aligned was part of that Berkeley championship team that won back-to-back TESPA titles, and then he eventually got a chance in contenders where he served as a main tank for Mayhem Academy, which is pretty cool, and that was back in Season 2, which was last season. And with these sign-ins, at least of the coaching staff, that now brings him up to 5 members as a whole. But, like, it's really cool. Like, we always thought about, like, okay, what's the potential of, these partnerships? Is it going to mean that, maybe some of the players are gonna, maybe get signed to Energy Esports? Is this gonna be something that maybe we don't really see outside of, like, behind-the-scenes stuff where, maybe someone is getting, a role on the coaching staff? And it's really cool. Like, we're finally getting to see this put in place, and, there's a direct correlation between the two officially after, all of this time.
Yeah, this is great news. But to me, it's just basically filling the hole that Harsha left when he departed the organization, because he was their main analyst. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense that they want to pick up another analyst, and, they're picking up an extra one too. I think Aligned is a great pickup because I have seen him play, and I feel like former players make the best analysts. Kind of like how Reinforce is on the desk. He can kind of tailor things to how the pros, want to see it and talk about it. And I feel like that's exactly what you need to do. Like, Aligned can put himself in their shoes and say, how would I learn best from this situation? and then he can tailor his analysis towards that. And that's awesome. I feel like the Shock just got better overall. And, you kind of need a person behind the scenes with Mercy that's, crunching the numbers, doing this. And while numbers aren't the end all be all, dictation of how things go, it does help to know that, it's taking AKM 4.5 minutes to generate a Dragon Blade. But his average Dragon Blade is like 1 minute and 45. So, it can swing things in both directions. So I think this is overall a boon to the Shock. And I feel like they're a team that's making good moves in the off season to position themselves to be that team that we kind of expected them to be, stage 3, stage 4 of season 1, but they never quite lived up to it. So I feel like they're getting closer to that. And when we do our overall rankings, my ranking will reflect a little more optimism into their, position.
Which would be a drastic shift in the landscape of rankings, at least, compared to Season 1.
Right.
So maybe the Shock fans wouldn't send us so much hate mail. Or maybe they'll just keep doing it. Yeah, it's all directed at me, mostly, because of Sinatra. That might not change. Who knows? Maybe he will play Reinhardt, and maybe I'll be more optimistic about his play. But until that happens, continue to send all your, Sinatra hate mail, or anti-Sinatra mail to me at TimLeDrunkCTR over on Twitter.
Anti-Sinatra Reinhardt mail. I don't know.
you can spin it however you want it. But if it's Sinatra related, I'm probably the one bashing it. But anyways, moving on, we do have the full roster announcement of the Washington Justice, and I know we kind of touched up on this last week, but that was before everything kind of got made official. It was kind of leaked. Oops. Accidentally by Muma on stream, but now we do know all of the members of this roster. So, initially, they were doing announcements where it was kind of like a slow drip, every couple of hours they would announce a new player, and they had, this, comic-esque, drawing that they had for each, person for the roster, and, I'm not gonna say, this was the best approach, but when everything was already known, it was more of an annoyance than anything. But that being said, I really did like the art that was being released with it.
Same.
So, kind of going back in September, we know that Janice was the first member to be announced for this lineup. He was there with Wizard Hyun, who came from New York Excelsior, as did Janice. So, joining Janice on the tank line, we have Sansim. For the DPS score, we have Stratus, Corey, and Otto. Supports, we have Phozix, Guido, and Hyunu. So this is a mixed roster of Korean players and American players, and just a fun fact, all of the NA players are based in Pennsylvania. I don't know of another team that there is any sort of synergy with all the NA players, so that's a little odd, but, I'm okay with it. So the more you know, it's just they're not in a more close area in regards to the team that they're playing for. But when you look at this lineup, I'll be honest, I am not blown away with any aspect of this lineup, and that is going to show in our preseason rankings. A lot of us are not feeling Washington Justice. That's not to say that there's not a lot of potential for this team, but when you compare them to the rest of the field, there are quite a few unknowns, and one of them, I don't want to say this player in particular is an unknown, but there's a player on this DPS lineup that has been pretty inconsistent in regards to his DPS play in Contenders North America, and I'm talking about the former Gladiators Legion DPS player, Corey. Now, Corey, he is a hit scan player. When he is on point, he is one of the best hit scan players in that region. When he's not, things do not look pretty, and there's never been a string of series where Corey has wowed me. I need to just see a little bit more consistency. So, he has very high highs, and he has really low lows. So whether or not he can string together, a couple of strong outings remains to be seen. So he's really going to be the wild card aspect of that team. I've liked Stratus's work on the Tracer, but then they also have Otto, who was at times one of the bright spots, if you could say there were any, with Shanghai last season. But for me, I love the fact that Fozix got picked up for the Overwatch League. This is a player who has maybe not been a standout in regards to mechanical play, but he really knows a lot of the ins and outs of all of the heroes, and his game sense has really been something that's made him kind of stand out against the pack. So, you can kind of consider him maybe more of a Seagull type role on this team, just on the support line, so I'm happy about that. But really, a lot of this, team, whether it is the roster or the coaching staff, it's all built from metagaming, Meta Athena, Meta Bellum. And you got Hyanu, you got Sansum, who were both part of the metagaming teams. And, they're connected with Avala, who is, serving as a coach on this team. So, you got that connection. But, I'm very finicky about building around the metagaming core, as I've said, just because, sure, every once in a blue moon, they might get a top 4 finish, but they've also been a team that's been relegated in contenders. So, they haven't really had the same success story as some of these other Korean teams or Korean rosters that have kind of been poached or kind of built around in regards to forming a team. So I'm just really anxious to see how they're going to do, because we've seen how important the take lines have been in the Overwatch League, especially in Season 1. And, Janice, as a backup, looked okay in spots. He looked really good in other spots. So, a lot of this, synergy with this team and how these DPS players are going to do is going to be off the back of Janice. So, I'm really anxious to see how he's going to perform now that he's going to be in the lineup pretty much every single map for Justice moving forward. So, there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of question marks. But right now, it's really hard to kind of pinpoint the bright spot of this team in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see if Corey can bring his level of consistency up. As a whole, I've basically dubbed this Boston Uprising 2.0. It's the team that no one really expects to do anything, but they do have the potential to, I don't want to say make a run at the playoffs, but they have potential on their team to do something. It's not like, these players are bad. I'm glad Otto is getting a second chance, because I feel like he is, one of the top tier players in the league. I think Stratus could be one of the top tier players in the league if Tracer ever comes back, or if he shows us, he can play other heroes at that level, which we haven't seen. I absolutely agree with Corey. Corey is phenomenal to watch. He's kind of I would say a less consistent Carpe or a less consistent Shadowburn. When he is on, he is exhilarating to watch, because he will pull off the most insane stuff that you just don't expect him to be able to do. The problem is it doesn't work all the time, and then he gets frustrated, and then he kind of falls into monotony, and then he just becomes this below average, pro player. Obviously still way better than all of us, but it won't cut it in the Overwatch League. And like you said, he even had, struggles in contenders. So I'm worried that other pro players that can pull off these type of things, like Pine, Soon, players that have that huge pop off potential, will be the ones getting under his skin. So we won't be able to see Corey pop off like he could. But as a Washington native, I guess, since I live right down the street from it, I was immediately excited when we announced that we were getting a team. And then as the roster leaked, I got less and less excited, to the point now where I'm just kind of yep, sticking with the fuel. I'll probably buy a Washington shirt, but that's about it. I don't have a whole lot of expectations, but I will hedge my bets, because unlike Boston, I don't want to go and say, they're going to be absolute dumpster tier. They have the possibility. Last season when we did our pre-season stuff, we were all oh, Boston looks like garbage. They're not going to do anything. We should have shifted that to Shanghai, and we would have been 100% right. But I will give them the benefit of the doubt until I see them play a stage. Like I will give any of these teams a stage before I give them like a final, verdict of what I think they're actually capable of. And then signings will come in, and I'm just qualifying all this so I don't actually have to take any of the blame when I'm wrong.
So moving on, we do have to talk about another new signing that actually dropped. So it was like a couple hours ago at this point, and that revolves around the Los Angeles Gladiators, who basically tweeted out, "Guys, this is not a debate. Like, this is legit happening. We have Pinker getting signed to a 2-way contract with the LA Gladiators." Now, as soon as I saw this, I posted in the staff lounge, and my exact words, in all caps, was, "It's about effing time." Just included with the entire profanity. And, this has been someone that I've stood behind. Because with the Gladiators Legion, like, this was a team that I loved to watch most in Contenders NA last season, outside of my boys of last night's leftovers. And their tank line was really one of the standout things on this team. And Pinker was just an absolute monster Winston. I remember clipping a specific play that was on Hollywood where he just pops Primal Rage and is just tearing apart the cafe. I phrased that perfectly for Reddit, and they ate that up. But, like, in regards to Winston players, kind of just across not only NA, but, worldwide in Contenders, Pinker was one of the top Winston players. So for him to kind of, like, I don't want to say, like, go unnoticed, but for him not to get signed to a 2-way contract already when they didn't have a backup main tank to begin with was a real head-scratcher for me. So I'm just glad that he's finally getting signed to that contract. So, be a little bit more money in his pocket. It also means that he could see some play in the Overwatch League. And, this is a player who, has a lot of experience in Apex. He played for Kondu Uncia back in Apex Season 2 and Season 3. He had like a short 2-month stint with Toronto Esports before he signed with the Gladiators Legion. And, he would serve as their main tank in both Contenders NA Season 1 and Season 2. So what does that mean for the Gladiators? Well, now they have a backup main tank, so they have a backup at every role. They also have 9 contracted players to their roster. And, when Overwatch League starts, this current Contender season will pretty much be done. So, there's a very good chance that maybe we'll see Pinker after, or, maybe we'll see even more of him. Who knows? Like, there's a very strong case where maybe, Gladiators Legion just decides to pick up another main tank, and Pinker can focus solely on, serving that backup role. But, like, in regards to, like a sub main tank, I don't think you can really find better, like, regardless of what the current off-season market looks like, because he was going to be one of the more sought-after backups or, potentially main tank signings to begin with.
No, I think this is absolutely like a Fisher-Jester situation. You have 2 phenomenal main tanks that you can choose from. And I actually think, unlike the other 2-way contracts that we've seen, I feel like Pinker will see play earlier than we will see from the other players. And I actually feel like that will lead to him getting signed, whether that's by the Gladiators or another team based off of, needs and how the first stage rolls out. I absolutely fully expect Pinker to get signed because I'm with you. He was my standout tank for Contenders. Every time I watched him, he was making plays. Regardless of what he was playing on, he was one of the first players that I ever saw play Hammond, and I'm like, whoa, that's what you can do with Hammond. Like, that's awesome. And he just has absurd levels of flexibility. Like you said, he's known for his Winston. His Winston play is top tier, but he also, like I said, he can play the Hamster. He can play Orisa. Like, I've seen him play every tank at a level that I would absolutely feel comfortable saying he could play in the Overwatch League. He just, he would have to learn the intricacies of the team and the meta, at that particular moment and how the team plays. But other than that, I feel like he could slot into almost any team and be ready to play just because he is that skilled of a player. So I fully expect to see him, get some play time with this 2-way contract as they're kind of, testing the waters with Roar and going down the line. And I fully expect him to be a pickup, in the midseason. And I don't know if it'll be the Gladiators. Like I hope the Gladiators do hold on to him, because that is a phenomenal hold. Regardless of if you play him, you're just denying him from other teams at that point.
Yeah, and if Roar doesn't work out initially, maybe they'll just, sub Panker in, and, he'll just pick up the pieces from there. So, really, like, out of the majority of the offseason sign-ins, I'm a lot happier with this one compared to the rest of the field, just because this has been one that I've been waiting on for quite some time, at least with this specific team. Because, Edinar and I were, like, constantly talking throughout the offseason. Where's the Gladiators Legion frontline at? Like, where's Panker? He's not going anywhere. And then we see him.
I feel bad for Gods, though. Like, Gods has been grinding so hard, and he's another one that I feel like deserves to be, at very least, a two-way contract, but he should absolutely be in there, too.
He should be next. Gladiators need to make it happen. At least we can only hope. Because he's another player that's been around... Man, for as long as I can remember, that's been a player we've been following since beta.
The old LG team, like Siegel's team, LG team. And he was phenomenal back then. Like, he was the first Roadhog that I was like, wow, that Roadhog's actually pretty cool. And of course, that was back when Hook would like hook you in like a different time zone and pull you all the way back, regardless of what was in the way. So, but yeah, I think Panker's a huge pickup, and I feel like this just shows that there's a lot of untapped talent that we could see come in as two-way contracts and then eventually come in as full players.
So with that being said, I mentioned at the start of the show, we do have expansion team rankings pre-preseason. And you might be wondering, well, why would you even do that? I mean, it's fun to speculate. Like, we all have an idea of, who we think is going to be the standout team. And, this is early on. So it's important to note that our plan is right now, this week we're doing the expansion teams. Next week we'll be covering the original 12 teams. And then we'll be doing all 20 teams. So for these rankings, we reached out to, the current hosts across the network. So we have Slambo, Spider, myself. We also have Edinar from Here's Never Die. And we also got Ren, who would be doing the Batcap with me, who's still, hanging out in our Discord and whatnot. So we have 5 different people all involved. And I'll give you... the rank of each team, and then I'll also tell you like what the average rank was in regards to the 8 teams. So, honestly, the first one will come as no surprise if you listen to this specific podcast. We're all kind of fanboys of a particular team. Pre-existent... yeah. No, it's not. It's not the Justice. It is the Vancouver Titans. So between the 5 of us, the average rank was 1.2. Now, there was only one person who had them in second place, and that was based off of his own biasness to a certain team. And if
Edinar?
It was Edinar.
I didn't even have to look at the spreadsheet.
You don't need to, because of the specific lingo he has for this team on Heroes Never Die. So coming in at number 2, we have the Hanzhou Spark with an average rank of 1.8. Coming in at 3rd, we have the Atlanta Reign, who ranked average of 3.4. 4th, we have Paris Eternal, who had an average rank of 3.8. So, those two teams were jockeying kind of back and forth between the 3rd and the 4th slot for the most part. Coming in at 5, we have the Guangzhou Charge with an average rank of 5, so we were all pretty confident with that one. Same with the next team. In 6th place, we have Toronto Defiant with the average rank of 6. And then we got the teams we felt were, kind of the bottom, at least of the expansion teams. In 7th, we have the Chengdu Hunters with the average rank of 6.8. And then across the board, we all ranked Washington Justice 8th. So, a couple of those were pretty set in stone. Edinar had a feel differently about the Titans in favor, of the Spark. When we look at these teams, you can definitely say like each team had a pretty standout sign-in, whether it was based off of a core roster, an entire roster or just picking up, maybe a player that, might have been put in like a bad situation just due to the team they were on in season 1. We do have some Overwatch League players kind of scattered throughout these expansion teams. But out of the lot that we see, Spider, who do you feel like had the biggest individual sign-in out of these expansion teams?
If I had to say like individual, I would either be between Atlanta or Paris.
Okay.
Because I would either say Defran, because I feel like Defran is a huge pickup if they could keep him reined in.
Mm-hmm.
Or Paris picking up Soon or Shadowburn. Like I feel like both of those are huge pickups, but I'd probably go with Soon just because it is the more consistent and he is a huge boon to any team he's on. So if I had to just say the biggest signing, it would definitely be the Titans just wholesale grabbing Runaway. Kind of like how next week, spoiler alert, I'm going to say the Dragons picking up KDP was a good move for the most part. But yeah, individually, I think Defran or Soon are probably the top two people that, we need to look at.
Yeah, see, this one is tough for me because while I absolutely agree with those choices, because well, in Soon's case, he definitely had a lot more stand-up moments kind of like throughout the season, for the inaugural season. Shadowburn he kind of fell behind because of the other DPS that was on that lineup, so he didn't really get that opportunity to kind of get situated back with the Fusion DPS core. For me, man, the only name that comes to mind, if I'm just speaking individual players, is gotta be Gushue for the Hanzhou Spark, which, if you've listened to me talk about China's region at all in Contenders or the World Cup, honestly, this should not come as a surprise to you guys. I'm a huge advocate of his Winston play. And, we got to see the damage that it can do, kind of on a more global scale. And I feel like, the Spark, we all feel really confident in this team. And we always talk about, how important that main tank role is on these teams. And I feel like if you're talking about the player that can have the biggest potential to, really open up the space or create these moments where someone else can do the work, Gushue is going to be the person to do that, at least for the Spark, at least. So across the board, Gushue and Soon, I feel like would be the top two candidates. But there are some names on maybe some of the lesser ranked teams that still do stand out. You have to define that's pulling out of Contenders Korea. You got players like Happy, who is going to be a pretty big name. I mean, even Shundu, who we have ranked pretty low, that's another one of those teams who, they have some players that haven't played since they were on Miraculous Youngster, or in some cases, your Bacon Jack, who last played for Flash Wolves, but, that, I feel like that's a team that we can't sleep on yet. That's another one of those teams that have a lot of surprise potential. And if I'm looking at these expansion teams, out of all of them, I feel like the Hunters as a whole would probably be the surprise team out of the lot. What do you think about that? Do you feel like some of these teams that maybe aren't as higher ranked by us have a better chance at maybe breaking out of the pack?
Yeah, I'd say if I had to pick one, it would be the Hunters. They have the wholesale chance of jumping to the top of, maybe not the top because nobody's going to beat Runaway, but jumping to the second place in our list over the Hangzhou Finger Bangs, as Edinar likes to call them, or is forced to call them by you. But yeah, the Hunters are kind of my pick for the sleeper team. But honestly, out of all of these, 1 through 7, I could see shuffling, just because of what we've seen out of the individual players. Like I said, Washington's still kind of a stretch for me, but I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility to see them become a middle of the pack team. I don't want to completely dumpster them, because I feel like they do have talent on their team, and if they can pull the team synergy off, which who knows what the meta will be. Hopefully it won't be goats, but if it is goats, synergy is way more important than individual play. So you're talking about a very different dynamic than we're used to in the Overwatch League, because we've never been in a goats meta in the Overwatch League. Like we're used to, the Pines, the Soons, the EQOs, all of those people like popping off and creating, these massive moments, like Surefour going on like a tear as Widow. But you don't see that in goats. You see the micro plays, like you see like Sinatra landing the bubble with Zarya at the pinnacle moment to stop a shield bash, which won't matter in the patch by then anyway, but stuff like that. So, teams like the Hunters, teams like the Defiant, even teams like Paris, who basically pull an all EU roster, could come together and synergize better than, these high-end players. But all that being said, I still feel like Vancouver has the advantage because they're already a team. So, but the rest of them, I don't want to discount.
Yeah, and kind of like looking at it from the other end too, like, when we kind of like look at these higher ranked teams, there's always the bust potential. Like maybe one of these teams isn't going to come out of the gate the way that we're feeling. And I feel like it's safe to say, like, when we look back at Season 1, at the start of the season, a lot of teams that came in with pre-existing synergy stood out at the start. London, New York. I mean, you could draw that line to Vancouver, who picked up all of Runaway. So, if history repeats itself, Runaway coming in as the Titans should come off to a hot start. But, like, there's always that thing, too. It's like you kind of compare it in the past where, well, how did Runaway do against some of these core rosters that have been built in regards to some of these Overwatch League teams where, maybe some of those results vary drastically. They did good against some teams. They couldn't beat other teams. So how was that going to kind of play into things? So, like, there's always that potential that maybe the Titans won't kind of have that same effect at the start. But, like, if I'm talking about like a top team that we have ranked right now, at least in regards to the expansion teams, like, if there's a team that has a highest risk of maybe not being where we feel like they're going to be, like, I think Atlanta would be that pick. Like, you have a team that is, you have the friend who, we don't know how his story is going to play out. Is this redemption arc going to be like a good story, or is it just going to kind of like blow up in Atlanta's face? Like, we don't know. But like, you also kind of you look at that roster, they have Dako and Pokepo from Element Mystic, who are a phenomenal tank duo, and that might be enough to kind of keep them afloat. But like, we haven't really seen the moments where we don't know how this DPS trio is going to work. They have a lot of potential with the Fran, Airster, and then Layer, but like, we haven't seen them all play together. And like, right now, that is my biggest concern with Atlanta Reign's roster. How are these DPS going to perform when it comes to their tank line, when it comes to their support line? I feel a lot better because you got a pretty substantial support core of Kodak and Mazah, who have had a lot of success. And Kodak, he kind of has come into his own lately too, with his Zenyatta work. But like, we haven't seen those standout moments for quite some time from some of these players. So like, there's a good chance that like maybe Atlanta is not going to quite hit the mark that we're feeling like it could. And it could just boil down to just one of those three players just not having, an impact or just control of the game.
Yeah, like I said, it's really hard to get a read on these teams right now because we're basing it off of a past meta, past past experiences, and you're absolutely right. Like, teams could rise or fall based off of meta. They can rise and fall off of individual play. Like, who knows? Like, every team could either be London Spitfire or Dallas Fuel. Who knows what's gonna happen in season 2? Like, it's fun to speculate, but at the end of the day, we're gonna actually need to see them play, and hopefully we get a preseason, a few games. We are getting these like championships, like Pacific Championship, like SoCal Cup. We're getting like, it's almost like we're on the outside and we're looking through like the door hole, and we're kind of getting these peaks at what these teams are kind of building towards, but who knows what's actually going to shape out. So I am really excited for most of these expansion teams, because like I said, I feel like any number of these can shuffle spots. So when we do our full rankings, I'm going to have trouble unless I go with that list where I just had to pick each team versus every other team. And then maybe that'll be the way I have to do it, because when I actually sit down and think about all 20 teams, I'm like, man, there is so much talent in this league now that it's infinitely harder than it was season 1.
Absolutely. And in regards to the schedule, it is worth noting we're supposed to be getting more details in a couple of days. Like, we'll talk more about this when we talk about Watchpoint, but we're going to have the full season schedule, and I'm hoping that also means that we'll have preseason information, because if we are going to preseason, which we should, for one, it would be happening at some point next month. So, fingers crossed we'll get details on that. But we got to talk about Contenders Korea. We are wrapping up, is it week 3 or week 4?
Week 3.
Okay. It's so hard to keep track of this because they all started within a similar time frame. So that being said, Slambo's not here to read off what went down in week 3. So Spider, why don't you take the reins for this one and let our listeners know what went down this past weekend?
Sure. Some Korean teams beat some other Korean teams. Okay. All right, but if you want more in depth, I'll read them too. Week 3, day 1, we have Runaway defeating O2 4-0. You called that before the match even started. I remember we were on Discord playing Overwatch, and you're like, "Oh, this will be a quick game."
Which it was.
Yeah. So Element Mystic went on to defeat Kongdu Pantera 4-0. So 4 Overwatch returns. Week 3, day 2, we have Team Stormquake defeating Meta Athena 3-2, which we will absolutely talk about because that is our kind of focus for the week. And then we have WGS Armament defeating Blossom 3-2, another very close game. And then finally, we have day 3, we have Geekstar defeating MVP Space 2-1.
What?
And then,
that was an upset. Yeah. Like, no one saw that coming.
No, not even close. So that was I actually went back and watched that today with the Stormquake game, and that was actually a very good game. So go back and watch that. Watch the Stormquake Meta Athena, and then watch that one. But our final game of the week was GC Busan Wave, and they defeated Genji Esports 4-0. So not doing so hot for the Seoul Academy team.
Yeah, it's been rough. Like, this was not the start that we wanted or hoped for. But, it's a complete 180 from what the new Runaway roster is doing. So after 3 weeks, we have 3 undefeated teams. We have Runaway, who have gone 11-1-0 in maps. They currently share the best record, at least map record, with Element Mystic, who are also 11-1-0. And then we have GC Busan Wave, with a 10-1-1 map record. So, things are definitely shaking up. Runaway is looking pretty good. Element Mystic, despite having a brand new tank duo, still looking as strong as ever. And GC Busan Wave, that is, a team that had no changes during the offseason. So, that pre-built synergy really coming into play. But man, like, Geekstar holding it down against MVP Space, I never would have imagined that. And that's definitely going to impact the rankings, or at least where people are going to fall, like going into the playoffs, at least for Group A. So, we'll kind of see how that's going to play out in these upcoming weeks. But we are going to talk about that Stormquake versus Meta Athena game, and this one went all 5 maps. There was a reverse sweep kind of getting built, and then there was a last-minute substitution by Stormquake, who brought in Kaiser for map number 5 after he didn't play in the other 4 maps, which was very peculiar. So I want to first talk about that. So like, you kind of talk about the decision making, and when you're Kaiser, like, I feel like across the board, he's definitely had the better Reinhardt compared to the Bag Monster. And, you know, the Bag Monster had a really good series going into this substitution. So, like, what do you felt like kind of like propelled the substitution to actually happen, just bringing in someone cold after not playing for 4 maps?
I think it just has to do with the history. Like, if you go back and watch the previous week's games, Kaiser is definitely a player that likes to overplay. Like, he likes to take the team on his shoulders and try to, you know, force them to win. And, you know, Kaiser is almost notorious for being able to do that. It's hard to do that in this meta. So there were a lot of times in previous weeks that Kaiser was caught out, like he was out of position, you know, he was too aggressive, or, you know, he wasn't aggressive enough. Like, he just would make a lot of positioning errors, which is, you know, not something Kaiser's really known for, but it happened. So I think what they did is they said, all right, we're gonna put Z-Bag in. We're gonna let him, you know, see how he does the first couple of maps, and he did really well the first 2 maps. Like, if you watch it, if you listen to the casters, like, they're like, wow, this is like a 180 from Z-Bag. Like, he's really turned this around. Like, he's playing top tier. And even after that, like, the next 2 maps, he played really well. It just wasn't well enough. Like, there were small, minute mistakes, like missed shatters, missed charges, you know, little things here and there that I don't think would dictate pulling him out at that point. Like, I think what ended up happening is they saw the reverse sweep looming, and they said, okay, clearly they're in Z-Bag's head, or maybe even he said it. Like, who knows what was going on behind the scenes, but they were like, okay, let's put in Kaiser. Kaiser is a phenomenal player. He has team synergy. There's no reason not to put him in. And, you know, he doesn't have any of the mental, you know, fatigue that Z-Bag has at this point, because Z-Bag has played 4 maps, and he, you know, a couple of them were actually rather close. So I think it was more just a fatigue type of thing. Like, they wanted to put in someone fresh. And with this meta, your main tank has to be on his game at all points. So they said, all right, we're going to put Kaiser back in. So I think it was kind of a combination of like a snowball. Like, they may not have initially planned to put Z-Bag in for those 4 maps, but he was doing so well for the first 2 that they were like, all right, let's just let him play it out, because obviously he's having a good night. And then when it got to the 5th map, they were like, okay, well, let's pull him out because, you know, he's fatigued, or, you know, he's tilted, or who knows, whatever the reason. So I absolutely think it was the right call. And I can't just say that because at this point we know they won and stopped the reverse sweep. But as someone who has coached teams in the past, like, the minute you see a player about to tilt, it is better to pull them out. So that, you know, and watching that situation unfold, specifically like Hanamura and what was it, Route 66? Was it 66?
Yeah, it was 66.
Yeah, you could see like there were just little things that he was doing that you could tell like he was more aggressive than normal. He wasn't, you know, landing the shatters as he had been previously, just little things here and there. So I do like that they run the cheese comp. Or it wasn't them who ran the cheese comp, wasn't it? The Meta Athena who ran the cheese comp, the 4 DPS comp? I'm trying to think.
No, that was Stormquake.
It was Stormquake. I was second guessing myself. Like, I like that Route 66 comp, like the 4 DPS, because teams just don't know what to do against it, and they basically force them into a 3rd point hold. So, see, I shouldn't second guess myself. Like, I was like, but yeah, I do like that they have some unorthodox strategies. So it didn't result in the win, but that was more so on Meta Athena, you know, kind of pulling it around on that 3rd point. So it was a phenomenal game. Like, absolutely go watch it, because you can see like just huge levels of like minute play here and there.
Yeah, when I kind of like look at these series across the board, the player that I was most impressed by was Lastro on the Zenyatta. There were a lot of moments where he just ends up like fragging out. I know, like on Lijiang Tower in the 2nd round, and this was after Stormquake basically 100-0'd Meta Athena on Night Market. But Lastro just ends up finding all 3 supports in the Goats mirror comp. And this came after Athena like invested like their entire ult economy, and that really helped kind of seal the deal for Stormquake to take both rounds on Lee Shane. But like there were multiple moments where you would just look at the kill feed and just the amount of pressure that Lasher was putting on and the timely transcendences that he had really helped sustain Stormquake pretty much across the board. And let's talk about, Route 66. So for those that have not been watching Contenders Korea or aren't familiar with the quad DPS strat that Stormquake have been using, they basically come out on their attack and they are running a solo tank, solo support. So they're running Wrecking Ball as a solo tank. They have Mercy as a support. And then for DPS, they have Soldier 76, Widowmaker, Hanzo, and Pharah. That's a lot of hit scan. A lot of sight lines that you can cover. A lot of damage just across the board. And then, Wrecking Ball is kind of doing his own thing, kind of like displacing people. But, like, it's crazy, like, that we're still seeing, like, solo Mercy, compositions, even after, her HPS got nerfed, all those months ago. Like, you just wouldn't expect that. So to see these pocket strategies is really unique, and it just brings a different flavor after seeing Goats compositions and mirror comps throughout the rest of the series.
Mercy, it's primarily for the damage boost and the res, because when you're playing that comp, you're not going for sustained healing. You're going for kill them fast regardless of who they are. And that's why it works so well on that point, is because there's so many angles, there's so many places that you can attack from. It's hard for a team to lock you down, especially if they're running Goats. Like Goats, even though with the Lucio is quick, it's very immobile. Like you have a lot of high ground, you have a lot of nooks and crannies, and that's why it works on this. And you see them, like they tried to fight back initially, and they actually got the first pick against Stormquake, and Stormquake just basically said, okay, whatever, and backed up for a second, and then just started the rush all over again. And it worked out really well for pretty much the first 2 points. And I am excited to see this. Like, Stormquake as a whole really impressed me as their teamwork, because you need a lot of teamwork to make Goats work. You need even more teamwork to make a 4 DPS comp work, because if one person is out of position, it crumbles, and you don't have the safety net like you do with Goats. Like Goats, you can kind of, expand and contract and still kind of be okay. Whereas, if your Widowmaker mispositions or something like that and the diva can get to her, it's over at that point. Same thing, Soldier doesn't suffer from it, but it's the same idea. So I was really impressed with this comp, and this is the second time they've done this, and second time it's almost given them the map. They just seem to stutter on third point. So I feel like once they're forced to make those switches, they need to make them a little faster. And they did kind of pseudo go to Goats on third point, and then transitioned more into Goats as time went on. And I feel like they just need to make that change a little faster. Say, okay, this is purely a 1, 2. Composition. When we get to point 3, we have to switch, screw whatever ults we have to make that switch, because we're going to have enough time that we can do an eco push. We can do stuff like that and get our ultimates up fast enough to, press Qs and win the map, which didn't happen these last times. But, the map that really stood out to me outside of that was Numbani. Like the stall on Numbani was ridiculous. Like, this is the second time we've seen like stall on Numbani last for 2.5 minutes. Like there was quite literally like a 2-minute fight where it was like 1 or 2 people on the point at a time, and they were able to basically stall it out, push them back enough that actually this one was really phenomenal, because at one point they pushed them all the way back that they lost all their progress onto it, and it went all the way back down to the second tick, and they were at like 98%. So it was just phenomenal, the level of tanking, the alt management, the primal to jump around and basically just flap your arms as a monkey long enough to let your diva come back to diva bomb. Like overall, that to me was amazing. Like I went back and watched that part like 2 or 3 times just to see like the little intricate plays, like how well the support stayed alive. And, they ran a an untraditional defense on that point as well. So overall, like Stormquake impressed me. Like I haven't paid that much attention to them outside of, watching some of Kaiser's plays or Kaiser's misplays. But I will definitely be keeping an eye on them going forward, because I feel like they're a team that is just getting stronger as this season progresses.
Yeah, and that stall that you talk about too was awesome, because like not only did Z-Back have that primal rage, which gave them enough time to build their Diva bomb, but that also gave Suljin time to build the rally as well, and that just kept prolonging it even more, to the point where even after Athena ended up getting the cap on point A, they only had like 3 minutes to work with in regards to the clock. So even with like that last second contest and losing their Brigitte early, like they were still able to take 2.5, almost 3 minutes off the clock altogether. So they got really good value out of that. And that's not the first time we've seen like these crazy stalls on Numbani. But I do want to quickly touch up on Hanamura, because there's one of these moments with the tank line for Stormquake that really just like, it was one of those moments where you just like,
oof.
Did that just happen? Yeah, it was a hard oof. So you have Meta Athena on the defense here. Stormquake is on the attack. Z-Bag Monster is running Reinhardt. And he goes to Earthshatter only for it to get blocked entirely. So what does Stormquake do? They're like, okay, that didn't work out. Let's invest the Graviton Surge. Let's invest the other, tank ultimate. And the Graviton hits something. Just not players. It hits the rock in front of point A, and it was just one of those moments where you just kind of had to shake your head and just be like, man, like, I feel, but, like, like, that just tells you kind of, like, how the momentum kind of shifted, like, Z-Bag just completely gets his shatter blocked, the Graviton Surge goes into the rock, and, Meta Athena ends up getting a full hold, and, they kind of started to turn things around for them going into Route 66. But what I really liked about Route 66, outside of the quad DPS comp that just came out, we saw, like, a lot of situations where, like, the counter picks or just switching off of certain things were very timely. It happened with, Innovation going to the McCree. It happened with Proper. His first blade really didn't find any value, and then he finally... It was a moment where, like, he got, I think it was a nano boost, and he was going to blade, but he ended up getting hacked. So then he couldn't even draw the blade, and then he just used it on the next fight, and ends up finding innovation, and even found, like, a follow-up pick with the dash resets, and then, like, he would swap after, but, like, there were just certain moments where, like, the counter picks were more timely and not more, like, it wasn't a moment where, like, it was reactionary to, like, what was happening in the game. It was like, okay, I got value out of this, now I can finally make the switch, which, like, normally we don't really see that. Normally it's, like, an immediate response to whatever's happening, as opposed to, okay, like, we didn't get to use it here, so let's at least try to get some use out of it, rather than just losing it altogether, and then losing a little bit of that ult economy.
Right. Yeah, overall, it was a phenomenal series, and I would highly advise, even if you're not really interested in Korea contenders, to go out and watch it, just for the sheer fact that there was a lot of goats, but it wasn't all goats, so you get to see some little intricacies in there, and some little special treats.
This will lead into our main discussion, which will focus on the 2019 season preview that was put on by Watchpoint. So we do have confirmation of schedule changes for next year, some of which, like, we've talked about in the past. So that includes the teams playing 28 matches in a regular season. It includes, like, the shift of the All-Star game being played after Stage 2. Same with, like, the playoff changes, where you have 8 total teams making the season playoffs, with the top 6 teams qualifying automatically, and then you have the teams that are 7th through 12th competing in a play-in tournament to determine those last 2 spots. Now, we can confirm that we are shifting from Wednesday through Saturday to Thursday through Sunday games. So on Thursday and Friday, we will have start times, and these are all going to be Pacific time based. We have 4 p.m., 5:30 p.m., 7 p.m., and 8:30 p.m. And then for Saturday and Sunday, we will have earlier start times. So we'll start at noon Pacific time, then 1:30, 3 o'clock, and 4:30. So, one of the big things about Season 1 was, we had very set times, which did impact viewership in regards to people in Europe, in China, Korea, what have you. It was more central to the area that they were playing in. So I remember there was a thread on the competitive Overwatch Reddit, which I'm sure you've seen. I know I posted it in the staff lounge, which kind of like showed like what the start times would be kind of like across the globe, basically. So, with these earlier start times, like how do you feel like that's going to affect the overseas viewership during the weekend?
I think it's good. Like there are some like in between time zones that kind of struggle, but it's impossible to hit time zones that are going to make everybody happy if you want a consistent schedule. Like that's basically impossible. So I feel like the shift to the earlier times on the weekend will absolutely help with the EU, with the Korean viewers, all of that. So overall, like, I said it when it was first reported. I think this is a good shift. Like I think they took the feedback from Season 1 and they did the best with what they could. And, I know Ed and R and you talked about it on Heroes Never Die, but they're also scheduling teams kind of around their time zone. So you're seeing a lot of like Chinese teams play later in the night so that, in China, even though it is early, they do still have a chance to watch it when it's not, 2 o'clock in the morning per se. So overall, like this is just a good change. So I can't fault them. I am happy all around with this.
Well, you might not be able to fault them on the schedule changes, but you can definitely fault them in other aspects, like the overall NA production that went with some of the slides that were shown on Watchpoint. And I'll be honest, like, I was livid watching the, like, just seeing all of the misinformation that was being put on screen during this Twitch stream. Because, as podcasters, like, this is something that's at times been brought up, sometimes, maybe we say something that isn't true or is, misinformation, and sometimes that can be reflected in reviews, but, like, for a league production, like, the information that we're given, I would expect to be correct.
Small indie company.
Yeah, small indie company, lol. And, like, I can't excuse the amount of misinformation that was shown throughout the broadcast, specifically when it came to the players. Whether it was a player...
Why don't you fix their mistakes? Why don't you tell us all of their mistakes that you caught and fix them for them?
I mean, I will in a second, but, like, these mistakes, it doesn't matter if it was a player not being marked as a two-way player, or, maybe the team that they used to play for was completely wrong. I mean, in some cases, Spider, there were players entirely missing from the roster.
Like... I know, like... I didn't catch the whole show. I will say that right up front. I caught the highlights and I caught parts of it, but there were definitely things that even I noticed in a passing glance, and I am nowhere near as like player detail oriented as you are. And the fact that I would notice that, I'm like, wait a minute, that's not right. Like, wait, what about this guy? Like, like the two-way player thing. Like, Snillo's not on the roster anymore. Like he's basically playing contenders at this point. Like, at least make a note of that.
So, okay, I'm going to go through all of these. Like, I wrote down a laundry list out of everything that wasn't correct. And there's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. So, speaking of Snillo, you had Elk and Snillo who both were not listed as two-way players for the Fusion. In the Dynasty's case, they had a player announced that they just kind of, like, brush over, and they're like, oh, hey, like, here's such and such, and, like, oh. And then they, like, Seoul Dynasty, like, announced it after. But, like, this player in particular is Fitz, and, they said, he came from Element Mystic. Now, this was a common mistake, not only just for this player, but, like, when it comes to, like, the previous teams, Element Mystic was listed for a lot of players when that was not the case. Fitz came from Going Water S. He's on the Dynasty roster, and he's not the only Dynasty player that got listed from the Raw team. You had Jexay, who was listed from Lucky Future Zenith. He actually came from Element Mystic, oops, that was a thing.
Whoops.
So going to Atlanta, we had Gator, also not listed as a two-way player. They don't even have a previous team listed, but, like, right now, like, he's on Atlanta Academy. Prior, he was on GOATS, which is still pretty current for other reasons. Now, they're known as first generation. That's besides the point. You had Nero completely missing from the Guangzhou Charge roster. You had Fozix listed from Envision Esports, even though he played for Energy Esports. You had Roki missing from the Toronto Defiant roster. Rappel was missing from the Vancouver Titans roster. The one person not part of Runaway was forgotten about.
That's how much he matters, yeah. I guess.
I guess through the Overwatch League. You had Rappel. Okay, so I got Rappel. So Fusions, again, not listed as a two-way player. In some cases, you had people that had left a team that, weren't listed under their new contenders teams, like Nomi, who was playing on first generation. And then, they also, made note of players who have, kind of retired. But they didn't do that for everyone. Like Avast, Mendo, Clockwork, Coco, Miro, Gambler, all of them should have been listed as either retired, or maybe they should have just made note in regards to what they're currently doing for that team. Because in some cases they are coaching for teams like Coco. Miro and Gambler are both still part of Gen G, but they are doing more stream and stuff. And, man, I don't know what was going on, if they had, a strict deadline, but, for the majority of people, I feel like a lot of people that were tuning into this, they probably don't follow the Path to Pro scene as close as I do. They don't really pay attention to a lot of the Academy teams. So, in a lot of situations, what they're shown on screen, or what's said on these productions, will just be taken as facts. And there's, I can understand, the two-way player classification, but, across the board, it just really caught me off guard. I'm what the heck is going on? Because to me, this is just one of those scenes where someone severely effed up, and I don't know who I should fault.
It's hard to say, who knows? They should have absolutely caught some of this stuff. The amount of player movement, the amount of things. Okay, a couple of mistakes I could forgive. Maybe they forget to mention that Coco's a coach now. Stuff like that. Little things. As long as they get the big picture stuff. Is this player playing for a team? Yes or no. If they fail that test, which they did, you got to start looking at, quality control at that point. And I do a lot of that in my work, in a lot of coding and stuff. I have to check quality control and stuff like that. So I'm very familiar with that process, and this absolutely would have failed that process outright. So I don't know if they didn't spend enough time, pre-show, because they absolutely did a test run of the show, because people tweeted out the day before. A lot of Chris, Zoe put out tweets of them, in the studio doing a practice run. So, you would think somebody, at least on the desk, would have realized it. And for me, this really makes me wish Miss Reinforced, because he would have caught some of this stuff outright, just because he's so close to some of these players. So I hope going forward that we don't see this become a trend, because we have seen previous instances, whether it's nerves, whether it's production errors, Dallas versus the Fuel type of thing, go down. So I hope that this was just a preseason kind of scuffed type of rush job, that maybe the show was 2 hours long, so maybe they had to expand it quickly, maybe initially they thought it was going to be so and so, and they were just going to do like quick recaps, and then they ended up turning it into like these long things. Who knows what actually happened? But I am with you. Like, this level of misinformation from a podcast is unacceptable, but from an actual like league show is highly unacceptable. It would be like, Sports Center or something coming out and being like, Tom Brady really killed it for those Buffalo Bills today, something like that. So I hope they fix it down the line.
We can only hope. But that's not like the big thing I want to talk about, because there was a certain thing kind of like slid into the schedule changes that caught everyone by surprise, and that is the fact that we are going to have road games in this upcoming season. Now, looking back, we were always led to believe this is not happening until 2020. We always were told, Season 3 or the 2020 season will be the start of this. That's not actually the case. Now, it is worth saying, like, right now, we do not have a lot of information on the road games. We'll know more about this in a couple of days, but for now, all we know is, the number one thing the league office is working on is getting teams into their home markets. And obviously, the vision is to have full home and away games, and this is basically the first steps on that journey to realize this vision. So what does that mean for this upcoming season? Well, it means that a handful of matches will be happening in home cities this year. To what extent, we don't know. Like, they could do this a number of ways. Like, you could have a city kind of acting as a host for, a weekend. It could be a situation where maybe they do rivalry-type games, where, you'll have Dallas and Houston, or, like, the Battle of LA, or, like, New York, Philadelphia, things like that. But, like, it's crazy to see, like, we're already going to be getting some of this stuff, so, while it doesn't mean much for the Midwest, womp womp, because we don't have a team outside of, I'm not even going to say Toronto, because that doesn't count, because that's Canada, but, like, we're going to at least start to see a little bit more travel, and, we've already seen a lot of teams start to branch out more to, do events in their home markets, but, like, we'll actually get to see some games played in other stadiums, just outside of, LA, outside of the grand finals, and no one predicted this, which is the crazier thing. So no. I'm really curious to see just the magnitude and level that we are going to see from the amount of road games that are being played. But that being said, like, I don't want everyone to be like, oh my gosh, we're going to be on the road every week. I highly doubt that is going to be the case, because this is just, like, dipping their toes in the water.
No, this to me says like once or twice a stage at most, like at absolute most. And I actually think you're right. I think they will focus on rivalries. Like this is purely testing the waters for home games to see what kind of, views, attendance, stuff like that they can generate. So I fully agree with that. It's going to be like Houston, Dallas, New York, Boston, the San Francisco, LA, stuff like that. So I was extremely excited to hear this though, because as someone who lives on the East Coast, like there is like little to no possibility that I can make it out to California. And I know you're a little closer, but it's still very hard for you to make it out there.
Right.
So I know, even though you don't have a team, again, womp. But it does bring an exciting prospect that I might actually get to see a live Overwatch League match this year. I'm not really holding my breath, and it will be Washington playing someone. But as a whole, like this took me by surprise, and I couldn't be happier. Like I'm glad that they are doing a test run before shipping the teams off to home and away. Like I think that's absolutely the right thing they need to do, and I think it's a very smart thing to do with the current climate of Blizzard stock, which I won't go into too much, but it is down a lot. So I feel like they need something to pick them up, and I feel like this could be the thing to like generate a little bit of goodwill towards Blizzard if they can cash in on some local markets.
So again, like we will have the full schedule for the next season at some point this week. We'll have more details on road games, and tickets will be going on sale. So that's important to note too. And kind of like after they kind of like went through the schedule, they also did like a sit-down interview with Nate Nancer, our commissioner, and he was being interviewed by Malik. And I just want to touch on patching in Overwatch League because like that's been like one of those hot button issues in regards to viewership. Because a lot of people don't like what they've currently been doing. And on that front, Nancer had this to say. He says that we're going to try our best to make sure we're patching between each stage. And that we plan on as close to live as we possibly can. Now, like this kind of like brings it back. So maybe this means like each stage will kind of have their own meta or their own flavor. But at the end of the day, and this is something that we brought up in the past when we've been talking about Overwatch League patching. Stability overcomes everything. Like, if you're not playing on a stable patch, and something goes wrong, that sort of blunder can cost you a lot more than, say, losing a viewer. And I know that's a crappy way to look at it, but that's just the truth. There is so much money involved in the Overwatch League where if something were to happen where there had to be, like, a full map reset or something to that extent where the game just completely locks up. Heck, we've even seen it at times, like, with the World Cup, with things getting a little jittery in certain times with the camera. But, like, you don't want that situation to ever happen on an Overwatch League broadcast.
Yeah. I mean, I'll talk about patching in a second, but how cool would it be now that we're getting the viewer, right, the actual viewer, if every viewer caches a little bit of the game, that they have some back-end system that could that could pull a game if it crashed from the viewer client, like 1-to-1. It may be like 10 seconds back, so you have to replay 10 seconds or something like that. That's not, it sounds crazy, but when you think about how all this stuff works, it's not that out of that much, like, it's not, I'm trying to think how I want to phrase it. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Like, it sounds nuts. Like, how are you going to pull all that data from all these people when it's absolutely possible? I do stuff like that for my job. So it's cool to think that would be an option, and that kind of helps with stability. If there is a system in place, like, who knows if they've actually done it. Like that was just like a off the wall idea. But as far as patching goes, you're right. Stability takes precedence, but they need to be more aggressive with it. I don't know if they need more resources, or what, because we can't be in a situation like we were last year, where at the start of a stage, they are already behind a patch and a half. Like, the fact that we started a stage when Sombra's rework was in competitive on the live servers can't happen again. Like, they need to be more aggressive with it. And, people talk about Mercy and all that stuff that happened in season 1 and all the, goats doom and gloom that we're seeing on Reddit right now. Like, if goats makes it in Overwatch League is doomed, stuff like that. We can't see that happen again. Like, they need to be much more aggressive with this, because one of the things that's really going to help the longevity of Overwatch, help the longevity of Overwatch League, is if people can watch people play something and then go right into the game and play the same game. Like, that's why Dota does so well. That's why League of Legends has done so well, is because people can say, oh, well, this hero does really well. They don't want to go into the game and see, like, a completely different hero. They don't want to see Torb throwing out armor packs and stuff like that. So I feel like they need to be more aggressive with that, and I hope they push forward to it. And this answer didn't give me a whole lot of confidence in that, because this answer is basically the same answer he's given since Overwatch League started. Is right. Yes, we want to patch in between stages. Yes, we could do that. I have always been the stance of, these guys are getting paid $50 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. These are pro players. They dedicate their life to the game. Get a stable patch working. Patch mid stage. Like, is it gonna, like, screw stages up? Absolutely. But these are pro players. They are being paid to play the game. They should absolutely be able to adjust. I know pro players, some hold that view, some don't. Most actually don't because they hate, having to re-scrim everything. But I think if Blizzard was better about communicating it, better about implementing it, like, I'm not saying, drop the live patch and then drop it the same day on Overwatch League. I'm saying drop the live patch, hammer out the stability. 2 weeks later, if it's not in a gap of, in between stages, pros should be able to adjust it, because every pro player, I don't want to say every pro player, but a lot of the pro players, and people may not know this, are required to go home and play competitive ladder to practice outside of scrim time. How much is up to individual teams, but multiple pro players have reported this. So they're playing on a different patch anyway. So how confusing is that for them? Like, to go from, like, we'll use Sombra again, to go from Sombra, who has infinite invisibility and recall time, to Sombra, who had a 12-second recall time. Like, if you wanted to practice Sombra, there's no realistic way that you can practice Sombra in those situations. So I feel like they need to be more aggressive with it. And I hope that is the case. But like I said, this wasn't like, oh, they're gonna fix patching in season 2. This was just like, oh crap, it's gonna happen again, isn't it?
Yeah, it was definitely like a blanket type of statement.
Definitely PR written statement.
Mm-hmm. But anyways, we do have the opening week schedule, and we got some pretty spicy matches for opening day. So to kick things off at 4 p.m. Pacific time, we got a rematch of the grand finals. You got the Philadelphia Fusion going up against the London Spitfire. After that, we got Boston Uprising taking on New York Excelsior. We got the Gladiators Dynasty Fisher grudge match, which should be pretty exciting. And then to close out the night, we got the Hangzhou Spark going up against the Shanghai Dragons for the battle for the first Chinese Overwatch League win. And I hate to use that as the storyline, but that's the only storyline that you could really use. So in regards to the opening day, like, what particular match out of these 4 do you think is going to be the most anticipated or the must-see match?
I mean, a lot of people are looking for the repeat of the finals, but it's got to be the Spark and the Dragons. Like, I am excited to see the new Dragons roster, because as we've talked on Discord, I have full faith in the team, but I'm worried about the management team behind them. So we'll see how indicative of the Dragon Curse is in season 2, or if it was just, a bad start for them in season 1. And we'll get to see how good Adenar's finger bangs do. So this will be the storyline of, China's first win. And it will be, will the Dragons continue to get finger banged? Or will they claim their first victory?
Well, I mean, what better way to start the season than by starting with a win and then just erasing the thought of the first season out of everyone's minds?
Or keep the record going. Keep the record.
Just keep building on it. Maybe they'll just end up going like 0-68 through the first 2 seasons. I hope not. Ouch. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, they have KDP. They should be able to at least get 1 win. I mean, you would hope.
They got to play the Justice sometime.
This is absolutely true. For me, the Spark Dragons is a huge one. For personal investment, though, for me, it's definitely Dynasty Gladiators. Because the Fisher signing was absolutely massive for Seoul. We've talked at length about Seoul's disappointment in Season 1. I need to see the adaptability to a more aggressive playstyle from the Dynasty. Because for me, that is my biggest concern going into the new season, how that's exactly going to work out. That being said, with Fisher, the Gladiators in Season 1, they went from a team that was kind of middle of the pack, and they kind of broke through the ceiling as soon as Fisher showed up. So fingers crossed that it's going to be the same case for Seoul, because I do not want to be a situation where my soulmates have to suffer with me to the point where the Dynasty don't even qualify for any playoffs, regardless of if it's stage or end of season. But going into day 2, to kick things off, we have Toronto Defiant going up against the Houston Outlaws. We got the Battle of DeFran versus McDonald's in Atlanta Reign versus Florida Mayhem. We got, 2 more promising looking teams, at least from the Season 1 outlook, when we have the Dallas Fuel going up against the San Francisco Shock. And then we got a battle between Chinese teams to cap off Day 2 with the Guangzhou Charge going up against the Chengdu Hunters. So, this one, I feel like the Shock Fuel match is going to be where it's at. Both of these teams made a lot of DPS movement, more so on the Shock side. But, when we talk about teams that have that potential that maybe haven't quite realized it yet, the first names that really come to mind are both Dallas Fuel and the San Francisco Shock. So starting off with a win is absolutely massive on either side, and a loss could definitely dictate kind of how, that first stage kind of plays out.
Yeah, I mean, you played the personal investment card the last day, so this is absolutely my match for this stage, just because I want to see how the Fuel shape up in the offseason, because they didn't make a lot of changes. They brought in a few extra people and they lost Siegel, but beyond that, they're one of the teams that made the least amount of changes. So I am curious to see moving forward what Arrow can do with them, because that is the one thing that I am interested in, is they have that dynamic coaching duo of Arrow and Jane, which I feel like outside of Wizard, it's probably the most high profile coaching staff. So I'm curious to see if Big Brain Arrow, took this Fuel team and really turned it around. And I'm actually curious to see what roles certain people play. Mickey had been practicing Brigida, which he became famous for in Stage 4, but who knows if she'll actually be meta at that point. Or if, he's going to go to the Zarya, because they have RCK for Diva. It's interesting to see how this team will line up. I will say, though, that if this team goes into a GOATS meta, Envious, that turned into Dallas Fuel, have always done really well in tanky metas. So that gives me hope. I don't expect that to be the case by February. I fully feel like we will have a very different meta by then, or at least somewhat different. Hope. Who
knows? It might be a 4 DPS meta. You never know.
I mean, in that case, both of these teams are ready for that one. So I am really excited for both of these teams. And, I've been talking about the Fuel, and I talked about the Shock a lot earlier in this, tonight. And I did that on purpose because I knew that once we got to this match, I would mostly talk about the Fuel. But I don't want to discredit the Shock. The Shock made some good changes in the offseason. So I feel like this will be a very good match. And you're absolutely right. This will set the tone for the stage and maybe the season. It's almost very similar to the Fuel's first game of last season, where they went against Seoul, and it was a very close game. And we were like, wow, we're looking at two of the best teams in the league, when really we were looking at two of the mid lower level teams in the league. So we'll see. I'm excited for this. I'm excited to see Defran play. But yeah, the Fuel Shock is my highlight.
Moving on to Day 3 to kick things off, we have Battle of EU. Well, I mean, I guess you could say it's that, but really it's Paris versus a Korean team. Because you have Paris Eternal going up against the defending champs, the London Spitfire. Then we have New York Excelsior, basically looking to just curb stomp Washington Justice, which is more than likely going to happen. We got the Hangzhou Spark going up against the Los Angeles Valiant. And then, this is easily going to be my pick. For obvious reasons, we have a battle, well, kind of like a rematch in some cases, of Contenders Korea finals. We have Shanghai Dragons versus Vancouver Titans. So, we have the debut of Runaway going up against the core Kontu Panthera roster of Shanghai Dragons. And, if the Contender Season 2 finals was any indicator of how this series could be or how it might pan out, this is going to be absolutely bonkers. I mean, the finals went 8 maps. And, if you're looking for a good test, why not put him against the team, or at least a good portion of the team that really brought the best out of Runaway, and really you could say that vice versa as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this by far is my match of the day. There is no other match this today, day 3 that even comes close to the hype that is this match. So I will absolutely be rooting for the Titans, but I wouldn't be upset if the Dragons won this one, because it would kind of be like that revenge arc type story for Contender Season 2, like you mentioned. But yeah, I hope Runaway wins. I mean, I hope the Titans win.
So moving on to the final day of Week 1, we kick things off with Houston Outlaws going up against Boston Uprising. We then move to Philadelphia Fusion facing Atlanta Reign. We got a Battle of California with the LA Gladiators taking on the San Francisco Shock. And then, traditional to, what kind of like capped off the first season, at least for day 1, we have Seoul Dynasty taking on the Dallas Fuel. This one's more kind of like up in the air in regards to like what I'm going to be most invested in. Obviously I'm a soulmate, and that might make me a little bit biased, but like that Fusion Reign match is very intriguing to me, just due to the fact that when we talk about DPS, like I felt like the Fusion DPS core was one of the more consistent, and with the amount of questions we have about Defran and Enlayer, like I'm very intrigued to see how those two players are going to be doing against, a DPS core like the Fusion, because that should be a very good test for both of them.
I think all the matches the last days have their high points. Like Outlaws is another team that didn't make a whole lot of changes in the offseason, so I'm curious to see what they come back with. Uprising, we've kind of talked about, they haven't had the best off season. There seems to be some problems, so I'm curious to see how they stack up against almost the same Outlaws team. Absolutely, for the Fusion Reign game, like I think that will be a big test for Defran, and I think we'll see how Fusion have built up the synergy over the off season, because they would have already played a game at this point, but same thing with the Reign. But I feel like these two teams hitting each other will be a good test of, really what they can do. So that one's probably the low point for the day for me. But I am absolutely excited to see the Gladiators play the Shock, because I think that's going to be like a very high octane game. Because I'm going to quote Edinar here, and I hate to do it, but these are the teams you want to watch if you don't want to watch GOATs. So if we are at a GOATs meta, these are the two teams that you could possibly see not run GOATs. So he's absolutely right with that, because these two teams will pull out the craziest stuff because of the tools available to them. So that'll be a fun game. But of course, I'm most invested in the Seoul Dallas game, not just because I'm a Dallas fan, but because, like you said, that's like the capstone for the first week. Like that's, it's the match we watched last year on the first night that we all sat at Discord and we were like yelling, and we were watching Junkertown push into like 8 rounds and all kinds of stuff. So it's what we've, the Dallas Seoul match is what we wanted from the Overwatch League. Like it's that story we have now, regardless of how the teams fared in the first season, which Dallas actually made it to the playoffs, which Seoul didn't. But that doesn't matter because we are in a new season, and we will see how these teams stack. So I'm actually really excited for day 4, and I'm glad that it is on a Sunday, because Sundays are one of the few days that I traditionally get to stay at home and kind of just do stuff around the house, so I can like throw it on the computer and watch most of the games rather than having to go back and watch the VODs or like watch one game a night or something like that. So I am really excited for this opening schedule.
Yeah, and we got a couple other notes here in regards to opening week when it comes to television. So I don't know if this is going to be kind of like a change of pace in regards to what's being shown on TV, but they only listed 3 games that will air on Disney XD. So on opening day on Thursday, they're showing the Hanzhou Spark versus Shanghai Dragons game. Friday and Saturday, they're not televising. And then on Sunday, they're doing a doubleheader. The first 2 games, which again are the Houston Outlaws versus Boston Uprising, and Philadelphia Fusion versus Atlanta Reign. So I'm hoping to get more details on that in regards to like the TV deal, whether it's ESPN, ESPN3, Disney XD, things like that. So it might be a change of pace in regards to where some of the other stuff is streaming online or just being aired on TV. But in regards to the full schedule, those are going to be announced on December 12th at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So that would be on Wednesday morning. Obviously, we record Monday nights. And when they release this stuff, that means that the tickets will officially go on sale. So, next week is going to be, or this week is going to be a pretty busy week in regards to Overwatch League, in regards to that. Hopefully, we'll have some preseason details. But for now, we just gotta wait a couple of days and we'll know a little bit more about travel plans for this upcoming season. So I cannot wait to learn more about that. And who knows, maybe I'll even make a couple of trips out to the Blizzard Arena so I could finally check that out. So with that being said, I know we are starting to run a little bit long. So let's go ahead and close out the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, one of the best ways to do that is to go leave us a positive review over on iTunes. We're always looking for ways to improve the show, so if you have any insight that you could provide us, please let us know. We have Overwatch Recall now releasing on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays with our interview series. So if you are an Overwatch content creator, please reach out to me. I would love to sit down and chat with you about the work that you do and talk a little bit about the state of the game or just stuff that is relevant to what you write or, talk about, whatever. So we got a lot of good stuff coming out of there. We got, a couple releases this week that I'm pretty excited about. Like today we dropped a hybrid episode which focuses on two of my favorite things, that being Pokemon and Overwatch. That was like the perfect content creator for me to talk to. Just combining both of my loves on his channel. I don't think I'd ever be able to find that in another form.
When I made the video for that, there were certain points where I wish I could have dropped like "Let's Go" Pikachu gameplay in, but I don't have any of that recorded. So I did want to layer it, but I ended up just Overwatch. But it was actually a really good interview. Definitely go listen to it if you're interested in Overwatch or Pokemon or both.
Or both. There are people out there. But with that being said, Spider, we have a number of ways where our viewers and listeners can reach us at. So why don't you let them know where they can find us?
If you'd like to contact us, it's been a long night, and I've got a VOD review after this. So let's try that again. If you'd like to contact us via email, you could do that at contact@owlnshow.com. Our Twitter and Instagram is @owlnshow. The website is www.owlnshow.com. We do have a YouTube, like I just plugged. It has all those interviews plus all our other content. It is youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. You can talk to us directly on Discord. We're all very active on it, and we generally respond very quickly to pretty much anything. But if you'd like to contact us directly on Discord, you can do so at discord.me/OWLNshow. If you are listening to our audio, we do have our Twitch stream up. We do our shows live. We have, two primary shows and then some host streams. Our Twitch is twitch.tv/OWLNshow. We are a Twitch affiliate, so you can subscribe to show, additional support for the show. You unlock our cool little badge. But if you'd like to watch the shows live, we have our pro focus show, and our Korean contender show, which is what you're currently listening to, which is Overwatch League Network. That is Mondays at 7 p.m. PDT. Or I guess it's PST now. And then you have Heroes Never Die, which is our variety Overwatch show, which is basically everything Overwatch, which I'm sure you guys will absolutely talk about the winter event that's coming tomorrow on Wednesday at 5 p.m. PST. And then, like I said, we do some host streams. Totem sometimes streams Thursdays, sometimes Saturdays. It really depends on the schedule, but I stream Fridays. Typically, we both start around 7:30 PST, give or take, just depending on what we've been doing. You've actually been joining me the past few Fridays, so that's that's actually been pretty cool because I typically start later. So it all works out. If you'd like to message me directly on Twitter, you can do so at SpiderGD. If you'd like to message Slambo, who is returned to the Abyss, and tell him to come back, you can do that at SlamOverwatch. What about you, Totem? Where can they get a hold of you?
Well, I'm over on Twitter at TotallyDrunkCTR. And, you know, if we're live, we're going to be live here, as per usual. So, I'm not entirely sure if I'm streaming on Thursday. I probably will. Like, we're getting new Windows installed starting tomorrow, and I honestly have no idea, like, what sort of hours these guys are going to be working for this installation. So that might even impact H&D this week. I don't know. As soon as I find out concrete details tomorrow after work, I will let you guys know. But for now, it's kind of up in the air, at least momentarily. But if I don't stream Thursday, I 100% will stream Saturday night. And we will just go from there. But with that being said, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us again tonight for our live show on Twitch. Again, you have been listening to Overwatch League Network. This has been episode number 60. I am your host, Totally Drunk, joined by my co-host, Spider, and we will see you guys back next week as we rank the original 12 teams for the Overwatch League. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Overwatch League Network. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at OWLN Show. The theme music for OWLN is the main theme and victory theme guitar remix by Michael Mack.